You're listening to The Art of Imperfect Adulting. I'm your host, Amy Stone. Here, I share stories from real people navigating the adventure that I call adulting. Are you ready? Me too. Let's do this. Hello, friends. My guest today on the show is Brenda Florida. Brenda, welcome to The Art of Imperfect Adulting. Are you ready for a fun chat today?
I am ready for a fun chat.
I know it. I will say the audience is in for a treat today because, as sometimes happens on the show, you and I actually do know each other in real life. And we've had a couple chances to meet in person, even though we live usually on opposite sides of the country. And today we're going to actually talk about a decision you made a while back, I don't know how far back, to shake things up in your life and change where you were living, but only for a very specific amount of time, not forever. So what you did is you moved from California to Mexico, I think for 6 months. Let's start with, I'm really curious, how long ago was it that you started doing just the planning for how you wanted to do this?
Yes, so it was early May last year, so a little over a year from when this show will air, I think. But it was May 2025, and I left on July 24th
Oh, really
of
fast.
2025. So it was very fast. Yes.
Very
yes.
fast. That is impressive, Brenda.
Well, part of it is because it lined up with my lease renewing in the apartment I was in Huntington Beach. So I had the idea in May, and then I'm like, oh, and gosh, my lease expires in a couple months anyway, so that's a good time to do it, right? I can put my stuff in storage and not I don't have the funds to have two homes. So I couldn't go to Mexico and keep my place in California. So the timing just sort of worked that way. But I never once had the thought that I would move to Mexico for 6 months until early May last year.
That is super interesting. All right. So you answered one of the questions that I always like to ask people when I'm talking to them about relocations, which is what did you do with your stuff? So you put your stuff just into storage for while you were gone.
Yes. Yep.
Yeah.
Extra space storage. Yay. Yeah. I just put it all in storage, packed everything up and put it all in storage.
How much did you take with you? Like, so you flew just with luggage?
Yes, I did. Oh my gosh. Yeah. So I have a smaller sized check-on bag, like, kind of normal check-on, but not the really big ones,
Yeah.
And a carry-on. And then I bought one of the big check-on bags,
Okay.
so I had two that I checked on and one that I carried on. And for me, I knew that I got an Airbnb down there.
Okay, so that's how you found it.
Yeah, so that's how I had it down there. For me, I wanted the stability of one place.
Yeah.
I have in my history about a 2.5 year period of time that I was homeless, and all my stuff was in storage then. And so I have some experience with not living in my own home, like not having a home, not being surrounded by my own things. And so I knew I had to take certain personal belongings that would fit in these suitcases, right? But with me down there so that I could stay for 6 months in someone else's home and not feel too disoriented by that.
That's a really important. So that's a really important. So I'm going to double click on a couple of those things because this is one of those times where you and I are sort of telling a story that I know parts of it that the audience doesn't know, right? So
Sure.
So several years ago there was that period of time in your life where you were without a permanent home. You were couch surfing and you were going from Airbnbs
Yes.
and things like that.
Yes.
And so when you made this transition, here's a question that I'll throw in there. How did you pick Playa del Carmen, right? Playa del Carmen, Mexico?
Yes.
How did you pick that as your destination for 6 months?
Yes. It was all very practical. So you all know how, as soon as you start to think something, things start showing up in your feed,
Yes.
in various places. So I had this idea that I wanted to, okay, first of all, and we can come back to this, but I knew intuitively that I was stuck in a rut in many ways in my life, in my business thinking, how I was thinking about my coaching practice, like all kinds of things, money making, relationships, all kinds of things. I felt like I was in a rut and I needed to disrupt my life. Like in my life coaching world, my sort of niche, my thing I do is I help people interrupt patterns of people pleasing or not setting boundaries or whatever they are, that are not serving them anymore in their lives. And so I knew I needed to interrupt this pattern, several patterns that I had been working with very consciously for many years, but I still felt kind of stuck in them, like they're still showing up too much. So I decided to interrupt by leaving.
Now
Okay,
you
by
could have
leaving my
taken,
apartment,
right, but you
you
could have
know,
taken like a trip. You could have gone on
right, I could have,
like a
but
10-day retreat.
right, but
Or you
money
could have
was
gone to the
tight.
west coast of Mexico instead of the east coast.
Yes. But so I start thinking I want to go somewhere else. I've always wanted to live in another country, like,
Okay.
for a short, maybe 2 or 3 months or something. So as I'm thinking that, but I'm very practical, I have an online business. And most of my clients are in the US somewhere, a time zone in the US. So I can't go to Europe. Not
Right.
that that's affordable, but that's what I want to do. I love all things French and Italian. So, like, what I want to do is go to France or Italy, but the time zone messes up my work,
Yep.
right? So, I'm just kind of barely thinking these things out loud. And of course, things start coming up in my Google feed about nomad, best digital nomad, places. And so I clicked on one of those. It was a Forbes magazine one, and it listed Playa del Carmen as it was like in their top two or three because of the infrastructure, because I
Yep.
got to have internet, right? My life is on Zoom. So I've got to have good Wi-Fi. And so I need that infrastructure. And I needed it to be affordable.
Yep.
And Playa del Carmen hits both of those really well. And I knew I had to be somewhere, if I couldn't be in Europe, I had to be somewhere that I imagined I would like. And I'm an ocean palm tree fanatic. So I'm like, great, in turquoise water, right? I've always had this fantasy of living, like taking a sabbatical from life and going to a tropical place with turquoise water. So I'm like, well, checks that box. I mean, I'm going to
Yeah.
work. It's not a sabbatical, but you know, checks that box. It's beautiful. I think I could live here 6 months. Do I speak the language? No,
Well,
not
we'll
at
we'll
all.
we'll come back to that. We'll come back to that because I am very close, geographically speaking, to Cancun and Playa del Carmen,
Mhm.
right? So we used to go
Right.
there. I live in Miami. It's about 90-minute flight from here to Cancun. And we used to go there all the time, like with the kids, because it was pretty inexpensive. Like you were saying, it's very
Yeah.
affordable. And
Mhm.
that's where this is. Playa del Carmen is the Riviera Maya coast in
Mhm.
Mexico. All right. So very, very cool. So how did you make the choice for the time frame? Was this because of the whole rule you have to be where you live for half the year for business, or why did you choose 6 months?
No, because that is as long as a US citizen can be in Mexico as just like a tourist.
Okay.
So I didn't have to, I kept an address. I have a daughter who lives in LA. And so, like, I just changed my address to her address. I kept, you know, by
Yes.
California, US standards, they don't, I pay taxes here. I didn't change any of that. And Mexico lets you come for a maximum of 180 days. So I went 177.
Very, very cool. All right. So you do that with your stuff. You transfer everything to your daughter's house. You were always seeing this as a temporary thing, which I think is a really interesting thing for
Hmm.
people to think about because when we read the stuff about Nomad online, the great majority of the stories are I moved to wherever and I was there forever. Like, now and forever. But you did this with a 6-month time frame, and your purpose here was to shake things up. So because you and I are
Yes.
connected, because we know each other, and we're connected online, I actually got to watch you do this. Like I watched the
Right.
stress build
Yeah.
before you went.
hmm
And
Oh my gosh,
then,
yes.
yes. And then you got on the airplane and then you were there. So let's talk more now. You mentioned that your intention here was to shake things up. This is something that does have a correlation with the work that you do with clients, but this is you for you. Let's talk more
hmm
about the motivation that you had for why you wanted to make this big move and what your friends and family thought about it.
Let's do friends and family first. That's so easy. They thought I was crazy. No, they thought it sounded like something Brenda would do
Okay.
that they could not ever imagine themselves doing. And it's interesting because I have always been a big risk taker. Okay. And it's part of my entrepreneurial nature, I'm sure, like whatever, but I have my life is full, my life story is full of taking risks. And yet I have given birth to 4 children, all in their late 30s and 40s. Well, almost everybody's 40 in their 40s now, that all have pretty safe lives.
Mm,
Okay, so nobody, I have one son that's a little more adventurous. Anyway, none of my children take risks on the regular like I do. Okay. And so they're like, yeah, I can't imagine doing that, but I get that you're doing it. Same way with my best friend and whatever. So they understood that it was consistent with me, with my truth, and they couldn't imagine doing it. So there was that. And many people loved it from like a, ooh, I wish I was brave enough to do it kind of perspective, right?
yeah.
I never thought of it as brave. By the time I was coming home, I was realizing that it really was brave. And now I give myself credit for that. But going into it, I wasn't thinking of it that way at all. Um, so what was the first part of the
So the
question that I
first
skipped?
part of the question, yeah, no, you had sort of answered it earlier, so it's fair that we're shaking it up. So your friends and family are used to you making
Yes.
big, bold moves. That's a part of your personality. But you can see now that they thought that you were being brave and you didn't see that till later. What was tell us more about the motivation. You had an
Oh, yes, the motivation.
intuition that you wanted to shake things up, but talk a little bit more about that and how it felt, if you can put yourself back in that position before you left.
Yes, yes. So my business had kind of plateaued in many ways, not to sound one dimensional, but my business is so much my life.
Sure.
Okay. I'm single. I've been single for a long time. I love being a life coach. I love working with clients. Like if I could have a waiting list, I would love it. Like I am of retirement age, I suppose you could say, because now I'm 65, but I can't even imagine retiring. I have no interest in slowing down. I'm still very ambitious. I want to grow a big business. I want to help everybody I can possibly help. Okay. So I have all this big vision, but the reality of my life is expressing at a lower level, and it's not changing that much, and so like my business isn't really growing. It's kind of plateaued. I haven't been in a romantic relationship in like 10 years, and I'm kind of sick of that, but I get turned off on dating apps quickly. Like I can't figure out how to solve that problem, right?
Right.
You know but I'm kind of sick of that. I'm not getting enough pleasure in my life. I know, whether it's adult pleasure, if we can't say the 3-letter word on here, I don't know.
I think
Um,
we probably could. I'm pretty
okay, we
sure.
can.
I'm pretty. There's. I
If
mean,
I
it's like
whisper, you
I
know,
think we could just say
so
it out loud.
can
I
we
like
just say that?
we can say it out
Okay.
loud. Like it's a joy, sex.
Yeah. Oh, joy.
Pleasure.
That's another
There you go,
three-letter word.
joy.
Yeah.
I knew which three-letter word you were talking about, though.
Okay, but you know me. So there were just these, my relationships with my kids are great, my grandkids, my friend, like I have a lot of great things happening in my life. I was living 3 blocks from the beach in Huntington Beach, California. I mean, from the outside, and I was supporting myself as a life coach, right? Like there are not a lot of life coaches, I think,
Right.
statistically, who are single people and are the breadwinners. I don't have a trust fund or anything,
Yep.
In fact, no retirement account. But I'm supporting myself. I'm in an expensive place to live in my own little studio apartment, making ends meet. Okay. I
Yeah.
wasn't going on expensive vacations or anything, but I was making ends meet. So like everything was fine, fine, the worst word in, the
Right.
English
Right.
language. And so and I had done things to try to shake it up or do, whatever. And I still felt like I was basically, my whole life felt sort of plateaued.
So let me
And
see if I can
so,
give you some other words for, because you used the
okay.
plateau, but so you said you felt stuck. That was, I think, one that you
Yeah.
used before, but just sort of caught in the routine. Would that be how you
Yes.
were feeling?
That would be a good way to describe it.
And you mentioned that you had tried some other things. You don't have to be specific, but what are some of the other things that because you're very self-aware in this process, you're seeing
Hmm.
this and you're like, I want to shake things up. Going to another country to live for 6 months is a pretty big shakeup. I don't think there's anybody who's going to say that that's not a massive shake. What are some of the other things that you would sort of tried and you were like, yeah, that's not enough. Like, because when we talk about pattern interruption, people will sometimes say things, and I'm not saying they're wrong. I think this can, be very effective. It's like,
Hmm.
take a different route when you, go through the grocery
Yes.
store. Start a
Yes.
conversation in a different way. Like what are some of the
Yeah.
things, if you can think back over the past couple of years when you were feeling this grow,
Yeah.
that you might have tried that you were like, yeah, I did that, but it didn't do what I needed it to do.
Yes. So I did many of those kinds of things, like the idea of like, sleep on the other side of the bed or go to the grocery store a
That's a
different
good.
direction, or because as a life coach and a person who long before I became a life coach has been devoted, some could maybe use the word obsessed, with my own personal growth.
Yeah.
Like for me to be the highest expression of myself since I was a teenager. I mean, I would have worded it differently, right? But whatever. What has always been the primary driver of my life and being having an impact in the world.
Yeah.
So that has been a very conscious driver my entire life with no sign of slowing down. I followed a lot of different people and done
Yeah.
a lot of different healing modalities and have done a lot of work in the last 10 years with these things that now I label pattern interruption. People call it different things, but getting comfortable in uncertainty,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Like the whole homeless chapter was great for that because there's so much uncertainty in that. And,
Perhaps
even
not how
being
you felt about it at the time.
yes, yeah. And even being an entrepreneur,
Yeah.
right? Like there's all kinds of uncertainty. So like changing little things. I'm a big mindset I've always done a lot of mindset stuff. So I'm meditating, like, setting new goals and getting excited and changing the way I'm talking about my business or the offer I'm making or, so all kinds of I was going to say smaller, but normal is
Yeah.
smaller compared to moving to Mexico in 6 months to try to change it.
So yeah, I will say I'm going to give you a little bit of a plug here. I will say that having known you for so many years, I think of
Mm,
you as a really excellent life coach. I have worked with
mm,
you as a coach, and I really
mm,
appreciate how observant you are and how thoughtful. And I think that one of the ways that that shows out is that I think that you can tell if people trust the relationship between helpers if they stay in connection. Right. You and I
mhm.
have had a lot of different
Yeah.
levels of our relationship. And the
Mhm.
other thing I'll say as someone who's known you for several years is that, first of all, one of the things that connects you and I is our passion and our love for the beach and tropical things and
Mm,
sun. Like you and I are
yes.
both about that. And then also, your joy for life and your ability to dive in and do things is a hallmark, I would say, of your personality. Like, it's like,
Ah,
whether you're having a smoothie at the gym or, doing those things. And so, when a lot of people will give sort of lip service to trying new things or being enthusiastic, but I've seen you walk this for several years. It's like, it's like, I'm committed to trying these things. I'm committed to doing these things. And so then you're at this point where you're like, I've tried a lot of stuff and it hasn't done what I'm going to do. So you level it up. You level it up. All right. So now you're going to go to Mexico. Um, you live in California where there's a certain amount of Spanish speaking population. I live in Miami where I just learned yesterday English is now it's number 3 for languages spoken,
oh,
more Spanish, Portuguese, and then English.
Portuguese.
And
Interesting.
yeah, we have a huge Brazilian and
Oh,
population,
right,
probably also
right, right,
Portuguese,
right.
but a lot of people from Brazil, which is an enormous country.
Yeah,
You go to Mexico, but you don't speak Spanish, Brenda.
I know.
Was that an obstacle for you while you were there?
Not really. So again, another reason I picked Playa del Carmen is, as you said, it's on the Riviera Maya, and so about 30 minutes south of Cancun. Very touristy. And I was living, the Airbnb I picked, because that's where most of them are, right in the touristy area.
Mm.
Okay. So many people there speak English.
Oh, I would say all of them.
Yeah.
I told you I used to take my kids there, and one of the
Yeah.
things was I wanted my kids to have a chance to practice their Spanish. Did
Yeah.
not work out that way. Everybody just spoke
Yeah.
to us in English.
Yeah. So
Outside of the
I,
grocery store, if you go to the grocery store,
yes, when you're in the grocery store, even actually most of the little pharmacy, because there's 3 pharmacies on every block down
yep.
there, because you can buy so many what is prescription drug in U.S. Over the counter there. The pharmacy folks didn't speak it either. But yeah,
Okay.
nobody in the grocery store is speaking English. I had some strange, thank God for Google Translate,
No kidding.
Oh my gosh. And everything. I mean, the grocery store was one of my biggest challenges the whole time I was there, but that's a whole nother story. But it was like running a gauntlet, I felt like every time I went to the grocery store. But the language wasn't really a problem. And part of the reason again why I chose it was because I knew that. I mean, I knew that it has enough American tourists
Yeah.
or English speaking tourists, I should say,
Yeah, that's true.
that
That's a good correction. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, that it wouldn't be a big deal. Did it influence my engagement with people during my time there? Yes, because it is different to have an Airbnb on the edge of town. Like I was right at the end of, for anybody who knows Playa, Fifth Avenue, which is the pedestrian section. It runs about 2 miles from the ferry that takes you to Cozumel north to my block. It ended at the block I was living on.
Okay, I know
Okay. And then
exactly where that is.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And so,
I've spent many an hour waiting for that ferry.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So I knew I was right on the edge of, that real super touristy part. So, but living in an Airbnb is very different than being in a resort.
Oh,
So,
yes.
like when I would go to the grocery store, take my laundry out, like, go to local restaurants, usually the wait staff could speak pretty good English, but anyway, um, it was a bit, I wish if I could do it differently, I would speak better Spanish because I think it would have been easier to be more social
Yeah, I can see
if
that.
I had spoken Spanish. I was going to say better Spanish. How about some Spanish? No, I mean, I had know a few words, but that's about it. And I went there with the intention of it. But that was one thing I did not end up giving my energy to because the whole 6 months ended up being so internally transformative. I was spending all my energy on myself, kind of would be a way to say it.
And also, you were not moving there.
Right,
So you were
right. I
not
knew I
moving
was
there.
coming home. There was
Yeah.
a timetable. Yeah.
All right,
Hmm.
so we're going to talk a little bit more about the challenges that you experienced there. And I'm
Hmm.
going to set this up by sharing with you and the audience. I think I've shared this on the show before if people listen to everything I ever say ever. But
Yeah.
I lived,
And we do.
there we go. I lived a year abroad for a school year. And I share with people often that it was one of the most challenging things I've ever done in my life. Expansive, sure. Delightful, wonderful, charming, but sometimes really, really hard. It's not surprising to me at all that the grocery store would be feeling like a gauntlet, like because those day-to-day things. Once I had to pick up a package from the post office in France. Tears, Brenda, tears.
Oh, I
So
can't
many
imagine.
tears.
Yeah.
Could not
Hmm.
figure it out. Had no idea what the lady was saying to me. Just wanted my package. So let's talk about some of the things because I think that is a part of why travel and relocation is so disruptive and in the end helpful. But it's like those comforts that we don't even know we're comfortable with
Hmm.
become daily challenges. What were some of the things that you ran into? The grocery store, definitely.
Yes, and it's funny because the grocery store is the one that surprised me. I don't know why I hadn't thought of this before, but in Mexico, all the products on the shelf are written in Spanish.
They
Like
are.
it didn't occur to me that I would look at a refrigerator case of milk and not know what the whole milk was. I like
Right.
to drink whole milk, okay? And cook with it and stuff. And you don't know which one is the whole milk. And
And
then
they have a whole different classification system for
they
milk.
have totally different milk. I mean, they
Yes.
do have whole and skim and whatever, but most of their milk is the shelf life kind of milk
The
where it's in a cart. It's
pasteurized.
not
Yeah.
even in a refrigerator case, so then
Yes.
that threw me off. But just like flour. I love to bake.
Yep.
Flour. It's not just that the names are in Spanish, it's that they don't call the stuff the same thing. So going to the grocery store took so much time because I'm both sometimes Google Translate with the lens, the camera thing is enough. I
Yep.
can hold that up, it turns the words into English, and I can figure out what the product is. Okay. Sometimes that's enough. Lots of times it's not because they just call things different names than we call them.
Or they just show you the Spanish word again.
What?
They just show you the Spanish word again.
Yeah,
They're like, whatever
yes,
the
it's
word
good.
is, there's no
It
translation. So
didn't
you're like,
translate,
oh,
right.
okay.
So the other thing I used was a lot at the grocery store was Chat GPT.
Okay.
So I would take a picture of the product, send it to Chat GPT and say, like, I'm looking for bread flour. Okay. So I like to make bread and pizza dough and stuff. I'm looking for bread flour. Is this bread flour? And
And
it
it
would
would
be
answer.
like, oh no, oh no, honey, this is not. Yeah, it would be like, no, this is not. Or, other things would be like, well, yeah, that's kind of the Mexican grocery store equivalent. It's the closest thing you're going to find. It's, like whatever. And it was so helpful because, I can talk to Chat GPT like it's a person, right?
Yep.
And I can just be like, oh my God, I'm so frustrated. All I want is lime juice. Lime juice. There are limes everywhere
Yep.
in Mexico, but you cannot buy the equivalent of like Santa Cruz lime juice that is like fresh lime juice without sugar in it,
Mm-hmm.
lime juice. Cannot buy it down there. Cannot buy it. Even the fruitery, like they have all these fruits,
Yeah.
little
Fruteria. Yeah.
stands. Yeah, yeah. And they have fresh papaya juice, fresh passion juice, fresh lemon juice. They have everything fresh because all the fruit, so easy to get there and fresh and everything. Lime, no. And every time I would ask for it, people would look at me like I had lost my ever-loving mind.
That is
And I
interesting.
use lime juice in a lot of things, and I don't like squeezing limes.
So
Call me a
that's
baby.
really it's so and anybody who for people who spend a lot of time in the Caribbean, if you do squeeze limes in the Caribbean, you have to be very careful to cover your skin because you can get a burn. You can get a burn from the acid on your skin, which is kind of scary. Ask me how I know. All right, so the grocery store, which doesn't surprise me at all, and I watched you doing that and going through it, and my heart was totally with you. I was like not going to jump in and try it. I was like I have been there. Like it used to happen to me where I would order food and take out and some random ingredient would be in it that I was not expecting. And I was like, what? This was not on the menu. I did not know that this is what I was doing.
Yes.
It's just so
Yes.
destabilizing. So what about there is an expat community in some parts of Mexico. I
Hmm.
don't know if there is in Playa del Carmen,
Yes.
but how did you were mostly doing internal work, but were you able to make connections with people who were English speakers who were there as expats and socialize and stuff
You
like
know,
that?
the only person I really connected with was the person you introduced me
Carol.
to, Carol, that met through you. Her and her family live down there, and she and her family. And we ended up connecting like in person. We messaged each other a lot. She was a great resource for me, super friendly, very loved her. We only ended up getting together face to face once. And a friend of hers was with her. So I met her, and there were many ways to get involved in the expat community there. It's very active. Like she sent me a whole spreadsheet of yoga groups and book clubs and a million different things. But I never, without this sounding obnoxious, I just didn't end up wanting to.
Yeah, yeah.
I I ended up being more so than I ever imagined. It was very much a cocooning time for me. And so I didn't want the stimulus of other people. I hardly went out to eat at all. Like I thought I was going to eat out all the time because great food, inexpensive at restaurants. And I'm like, oh yay, I'm going to eat out a bunch and really enjoy that because I'm a big foodie. I if I bet I didn't go out 10 times in 6 months, maybe 10 in 6 months because I didn't want to leave. Like I just was in my little cocoon of my Airbnb and the rooftop pool.
Yep.
If you look at my social media feed, you will see the Mexico time because all it is rooftop pool pictures. So I didn't end up doing that, but I could have easily. I could have easily.
Did you do any of the touristy Riviera Maya stuff? Did you go to any of the beaches or Tulum or the
I went when my son, so I my both of my sons visited. And so when my older son came, we went up to Cancun and did a catamaran to Isla
yeah,
Mujeres and snorkeling. We did that thing. And what did we do? Oh, and we went to Cozumel just to go spend a day at an all-inclusive over there.
yeah.
The beach is a little better over there. They don't have sargassum like we had in Playa. It
Oh, I
was
wasn't going to ask you,
like
but you had a
the
ton of sargassum.
worst.
It's the worst.
Yeah, the worst year in history, like 4 times as much sargassum in recorded history has ever had in Mexico. And now I've already heard it's already back and it's horrendous this
Yep.
year. It looks so far too. But anyway,
And that all comes to
so
the Florida beaches eventually.
oh, it
So
does.
yeah, I know we get that same. I guess it'll start in a couple of weeks. Like so, it floats on up. What
Oh,
so it is for anybody who doesn't know, it's a seaweed, a naturally occurring seaweed, sea of
yeah,
Sargasso, and it is blooming in excess all through that whatever the coastline is. And in the tourist area of Mexico, they are aggressively cleaning it up like all of the
yes.
time, but you cannot keep up with it. It
Mm-mm.
smells, it's abrasive on your skin in the water. And it's a huge tourism issue. Huge
It
tourism issue.
is.
Yeah.
And it was present all the time. It's supposed to,
Oh, it
because
was
the
there the
current
whole time you
bring
were
it in.
there.
The whole time I was there, even in December,
That's
you
pretty
c-
unusual, I think.
yeah, very
Okay.
unusual. And there wasn't tons of it, but you could still smell it.
Yeah, it stinks.
And so I also didn't hardly go to the beach because it smells like sulfur, like rotten
Hmm.
eggs, right? It's hard to ignore. And
And
so
stuff
I
gets,
hardly went to the
yeah.
beach.
And for me, as someone who goes to the beach all the time, when the sargassum is there, there's a legitimate issue. Like, so stuff gets stuck in the sargassum, like everything from little
Mhm.
fish and little crabs and things that should be there,
Yes.
to icky stuff like garbage. And so
Oh, yeah.
if you have to walk through a deep pile of sargassum to get
Oh,
to the water,
you don't want to do that.
it is icky, and also you can like step on stuff you don't want to step on.
Sure.
And so it's a big issue. And so I'm sorry that is the reason. Truthfully, that's the reason we stopped vacationing there, is because
Mm.
it was, when we vacation was spring, winter and spring, and the spring is when the sargassum
Mhm.
blooms now, and so it just was not as fun. It was not as
Yeah.
fun. It was not as fun. All
No,
right,
no.
so that I'm glad you got a chance to enjoy some of that warm, salty water, though, because that's a big advantage of
Because
being
it
in
is,
the
I did
Caribbean.
love that. The few
Yeah,
times I went, I would get out a little past where, the sargassum wasn't so bad and the water's so warm. And of course,
yep,
being at the beach on the West Coast, I'm used to cold water all the time, right? So it was so nice to be in the warm, salty water. But it is also the other reason I loved my rooftop pool because I had a great view of the ocean.
yep.
And so I kind of learned I don't have to be in the sand or in the water. If I can see it, it does for my soul what I need, what
Oh,
I need for the
great.
ocean. And so that was a good little thing to learn.
Okay, so you knew that you wanted to interrupt and
Hmm.
disrupt your status quo. And what did you think? You thought you were going to do more exploring and eating out and socializing. And we've talked about how that didn't work out exactly the way you were. If you were to think back to before you left, what do you think your
Hmm.
thought was of what would happen, while you were there, what the transformation was going to look like? What were you expecting?
Yeah. So I was expecting little social butterfly Brenda to be learning her Spanish and, going out several times a week and meeting, hooking up with expats, maybe dating, have a little of those three-letter words, like uh
Some
I'm
joy, people,
thinking
some joy.
the joy, the joy. Yeah, that was it. So that's how I thought it was going to be because my Southern California life, which was coming right out of being without a home for 2.5 years, I was on a very tight budget, we'll say. And so I didn't go out hardly ever. I didn't date because I'm like, I don't know if I can afford to pay my own half if I have to pay, like
Yep.
whatever. And so I was very insulated in my home. So I thought I was going to go there and be like all out and about all the time and, get my social back on because I love being social and being with people and meeting strangers and, all the things. And so it was very surprising to me that none of that happened. I mean, I had no interest.
All right.
Yeah.
So then you've talked a little bit about it, that it was deeply personal transformation that you experienced. You talked about that online and you shared it with
Hmm.
people who know you while you were there. Not like oversharing or anything. So, but this is not something that I learned for the first time when you did.
Right.
How would you describe the transformation now that
Hmm.
that you would say that you experienced as a result of these 6 months?
Hmm. Well, one, I want to draw the parallel, the analogy between what I did and what many of us do and have done, and part of how you and I have been in the same room at the same time together is going on retreat,
Yeah.
right? And you asked me that, like, why not just go on a retreat? Why? So when we change our environment like that, it opens up all kinds of things to us, right? That we're always there, but there is a power in changing your environment a for a day.
Yeah.
Do a 1 day retreat, right? Or a weekend or a week long, whatever, with a coach, with a who cares what? Go by yourself. Go lock yourself in a cabin or on a beachfront for even a whole day and take away the stimulus. Stay off your phone, take away all the normal stimulus that you have in your life and it just especially if you have an intention for it too, but it just opens up our inner that inner wisdom that we all have, our truth that is always there but we don't always listen to, it gives it the space to come out, to be known to us. Okay. And so most of us have experienced that on at least what I'm calling small levels
Yep.
like that, like a retreat. So even though I had done that and I've hosted retreats, and that's what I always say, like just get away when you get away and change your environment. Yeah, I'm a great coach and we'll do great things, but just the fact that you're going to get away and invest in yourself, like there's also that, right?
Yeah.
There's that I am choosing myself.
Yeah. And
Okay.
this, you didn't have anybody walking you through it. I do think there's a difference between
Oh,
going on a
oh
treat with
yeah.
like a guide and putting yourself in a spot where it's just you and more of
Yes, yes.
you.
And more of me, but I am a trained professional.
Sure, but
So
it's
I'm sure
hard
that
to
that
see the
helped.
label
But
from
it,
inside the bottle.
yes, it is. And I love that expression. It is very hard to see the label from inside the bottle. And, but nonetheless, anyway, that is what, like that, it's a great metaphor or analogy because that's what I ended up doing to myself in a bigger way than I even dreamed. Like, because of all the ways, and I think an easy way to describe like the situation with the grocery store and stuff, what it's like living, in a
Yeah.
different country where you don't speak the language, is that so many things about your day-to-day life you suddenly have to think about or be mindful about, or they take effort that now that I'm back in sunny LA, I don't, they don't take effort. I don't have to think about them.
Yeah.
I go to my kitchen, I have hot water.
Yep.
I can brush my teeth with tap water here. It's amazing,
Oh
So
yeah, that's a big thing about being in the Caribbean is that whole
yeah,
that extra
yeah,
step
the
of, oh my
water
gosh, where
thing.
did the water come from? Yes.
Yeah, yeah. And I had no hot water in my kitchen. I had to just get used to washing dishes in cold water.
Really?
No, and it's very common. And I was in, a fairly high-end Airbnb, like,
Yeah.
you know, but yeah, no oven, no hot water in the kitchen. They have everybody's got toaster ovens.
Yep. Yep.
But anyway, so all of a
That's interesting.
sudden lots of things are kind of hard, like not insurmountable, but like you add them up, and all of a sudden, all these things are taking effort. And it totally changes the chatter. You're not, you go out and you hear people talk, but you don't necessarily understand anything they're saying. So it's not like being in a US restaurant or walking into a Starbucks and hearing people order their coffee. Like we absorb that noise in a way we don't think about.
Yeah.
When you're in a place where they don't speak your language, you don't absorb that noise. I mean, you hear, but you don't absorb it the same way. So it leaves you to yourself in a different way.
Yeah.
And I wanted this, right? I was seeking this, okay?
Did you have to remind
So
yourself of that periodically through the trip? Like, were you like, remember, Brenda, you chose this?
yes, yes. And actually, I didn't get, not because of the amount of inner transformation, but I have a super high tolerance for that, okay? But for all the things that frustrated me.
Yeah.
About 3 months in, and I'm super positive.
Yep.
I border on toxic positive, right? So it was all fun and games. Even the sargassum was like, oh, who cares? I got a rooftop pool and a view of the ocean, and everything's wonderful. And it's great that I walk a half a mile in the 95-degree heat, plus all the humidity for, to go to the grocery store each way. And then pull my groceries home
Yep.
in a cart, right? Which
Yep.
is heavy. Like you can only buy so many. Anyway, oh, this is great. I'm getting my steps in. And after about 3 months of that, I'm just like, this, like, could I just drive to the grocery? I didn't have a car. So anyway, so I had to remind myself a lot there in the second half of my journey. But it was funny because the actual inner transformation was like that didn't wind up getting overwhelming for me. And
Okay.
I'm a journaler. I mean, I journaled so much. I journaled more in those 6 months than I probably typically do in a year because it's just how I kept working it out. But now this is happening, and now why this again? And oh my gosh, now I'm seeing This is why I haven't been able to break that pattern. I mean, these are deep religious patterns because, as you may remember about my story, I grew up in a very conservative, one could even call it fundamentalist, evangelical, churches, family culture, like all the things. And so I grew up with tons of patriarchy, tons of women having no power, and never rebelling against that, believing what authority tells me without questioning all the things a good little Christian girl does, and didn't question any of that until I got in my 30s.
Yeah.
And so that makes that a really deeply embedded thing. And I realized, just for a tiny example that won't take much time to say, as an entrepreneur, I have spent a lot of my life working for other people, okay, before I
Yep.
was on my own in my practice. It was real estate, but I managed offices. I had leadership positions where I was making a salary, okay? And I'm in a system. It's a company. The company pays me. I show up and I do a great job, and then this company pays me,
Yep.
okay? Which is a very patriarchal, hierarchical system, okay? Part of the capitalism system. Well, now the last 8 years, I'm not doing that.
Yeah.
I'm asking people to pay me directly. There's no system like that supports it. There's no men paying me anymore.
Yep.
Okay, I grew up thinking I would always have money through my husband. Husband makes the money, I stay home with the kids. Okay,
Okay.
do PTA and volunteer and go to church all the time. Okay, so the idea that I even became the breadwinner of my family at about 35 when I separated from my husband was shocking. Like, I never ever saw myself as a working person. Okay. I lived out my entrepreneurial fantasies through my husband and the business that he ran. Right.
Sure.
So I started realizing, like, all these ways that part of the reason I was probably struggling in my business and making more, not making as much money as I wanted to, is because I have this deep belief that it's men who are supposed to be making the money. That as a woman, I'm not even in the right lane over here. Now, do I believe that consciously? Hell no, of course not. But, remember that the conscious part is about 10% of what's
That's
going
right.
on, and the subconscious part is the other 90. And all this different aspects of my environment. And because I was willing also to go through the discomfort of letting myself be in that cocoon, right?
Right.
Because a caterpillar is not just sleeping and enjoying himself in that cocoon. A caterpillar is actually dissolving into liquid, from form to liquid.
Yep.
So you got to be willing to do that. But I was in for it, right? And so I just
Yeah.
kept staying in it and digging deeper and peeling back more layers. But it was that kind of stuff, like really old stuff, that I found while
So
I was there. And
then,
I'm like, no wonder all that other stuff above it wasn't really sticking, right? It wasn't really working.
so let me ask you a question just for the folks. I think I know, but I'm
Yeah.
going to read like,
Again.
so you were, because you were separated from your routine and you were disrupted
Mm-hmm.
and you were isolated and you were able to focus, you were able to observe the patterns of your behavior
Mm-hmm.
that were still repeating things that cycles you thought you had broken when you were 35.
Yes.
Decisions you were making based on learned lessons of this is the way it's supposed to be. This is this
Mm-hmm.
really unique thing, not unique, this really interesting thing, I think, which is that, like, even when the gatekeepers and the rule makers are gone, right? So, like, there's nothing official right now, at least in the country where you and I live. It's very capitalistic, but women are allowed to own property and have businesses and have bank accounts. There are no rules about that,
Yeah.
but every once in a while, if you look around, I think you can see that people are still following those customs,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
the patterns are still the same, right? So when we
Yes.
see that, like, all the people in charge are still men, or anytime
Yes.
you have a conversation with somebody and everybody that they show up and offer as an expert is a man, or,
Yes.
right? They're not necessarily doing that on purpose, and maybe probably giving you, great person. They could be a perfect example, right? But there is always the chance that one of the reasons that we're doing that is that there was messaging when we were small that this is who we're supposed to look for. Um,
Yes.
so,
Yes, it's
all right.
still so prevalent. And it's why I'm so passionate about, and actually, this idea of talking about how I coach people, specifically me,
Yeah.
um, through the lens, to talk about it through that lens of patterns,
Yeah.
and that all these things are patterns that have been set up for us since we were kids. They're coping devices that we use to make our lives safer as kids,
Yep.
emotionally, physically, however. And that it is the freedom now is to interrupt those patterns so that we can then learn a new way to respond where they're not, in charge.
100%. Yeah.
Um,
One
that
of
came
the,
to me
yeah.
at the end of my time in Mexico. Like I've never, I mean, I've talked about my work kind of like that. Like it may feel familiar to you to hear it, but to my like people who don't know me, my Instagram followers or whatever, they wouldn't, even anybody who's followed and listened to everything I said all these years, they would be like, oh, that's a new way she's talking about it. Because it took that, I think, because it took that transformation, my ability to interrupt my own limiting patterns to get that clarity on that insight. Oh, this is what I'm also doing professionally in the world in a way that I can talk about it that people, it's easy to understand. It's not
Yeah.
psychobabble,
Yeah, no, you
weirdness.
can't see. I believe two things, and this is the gospel according to Amy. You can't see
Yes.
things that are invisible to you. Like, so it's very hard to see
Yes.
things that decisions we're making that limit us. It's also very hard to hear it from other people.
Mhm.
Like, you just don't hear it if you're not ready for it a lot of the time, right? It's
Mhm.
just really, really hard to see it. And the other thing is that I often think that, and this echoes what you're saying about the patterns, our behaviors are a representation of our motivation and our beliefs. And so
Mhm.
often, as painful as it is, if we're doing something, if we're saying, "Oh, I want to do this," so like, okay, I give this example all the time. If you're
Yeah.
saying you want to get up at 5 o'clock in the morning and you are
Mhm.
not getting up at 5 o'clock in the morning, somewhere in there is something going on that you don't actually want. Your motivation is not truly
Yes.
there because you know how to do it. And if you needed to, like I always tell people, I'm like, if you had a flight to catch, you would set the alarm and get up. Like there's
Mhm.
no secret to
Right.
this. All right.
Right.
So very cool. All right. Do you think that you could have experienced this level of personal growth and transformation without packing everything up, putting it into storage, and moving to Mexico for 6 months?
No, I don't. I don't. Yeah, I really don't.
That's very cool. No, that's honest. All right.
Yeah.
So in a second, that's you can tell that she's sure about that. She's like, no. Mm-mm.
Yeah,
Next
no,
question.
no.
All right.
I mean, I guess maybe I could have, but it sure as hell would have taken me years and years
Yeah.
to go for the amount of growth. Even for somebody like me in my day-to-day life, I have always been devoted to my personal growth. And a lot of people aren't, and there's nothing wrong with that. Like I'm not better because of that, but like it is like a strange thing with me, how relentless I am with myself about that. But I so many times was like, oh my gosh, like what I journaled today was like 6 months of therapy. Like it was so compounded that even if I could have done it without going to Mexico, it would have taken me years to do it, I think.
I think that's
Yeah.
fair. I think that's fair. I've talked to people, not for a while, but maybe. Have you ever talked to anybody who's done one of the silent retreats, like one of the Vedic
Yes, I
silent
have
retreats?
a friend who does it routine, 2 or 3 times a year.
That
Yes.
your experience in the cocooning reminds me of the conversations I've had
Hmm.
about that because it's like this the only thing you have is
Yes.
yourself and your thoughts.
Yes.
And maybe some sign language.
Yeah.
All right. So in a second, we're going to do the final questions. You are back in the beautiful city of Angels. You are, as
Yes,
you've
I
mentioned, a life coach. You help people with transformation, with identity, with lots of other things.
am.
I'm going to put your contact information in the show notes. I never know if people actually will go there. So do give a shout out of what is the top way that if people want to find you, that you want to send them to get in touch with you?
Yes. So I'm pretty easy to find with a name like Brenda Florida,
Greatest name
right?
ever. And honestly, it's
Well,
shocking to me that you're not an OnlyFans porn star. It's like the greatest name.
listen, I have thought about it. I have thought about an OnlyFans page. I have not done that yet, but anyway, could be another revenue stream. So Brenda Florida, on Instagram, I'm Brenda Florida Coach.
Okay.
But then my website's just brendaflorida.com. Like you probably just Google Brenda Florida and something of mine is going to come up because there aren't other Brenda Floridas, right? TikTok, I'm Brenda Florida Life Coach. We're going to drop in the show notes free thing I have for everybody. Do we
Yep. I'll
talk
tell
about
that.
that now or
Yep. And
later?
you've got a podcast. Shout out your podcast.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. My podcast. I'm so excited about this. Why do I keep doing that?
Oh, now that I knew that was the title, and now I get the connection to your experience.
Yes, to the
Very
pat.
good.
Why? Because we're always like, why am I still doing that? Why am I still
Yeah.
dating the wrong guy? Why am I still in a job I hate? Like, like all the things. And so, yes, that's where that came from. From in Mexico, I came up with that in Mexico, and then
I
just
love it.
started it recently. Yeah, yeah.
Love that. All right. So, and you do have a free offer for the guests, which is a private guided audio and companion worksheet designed for the ambitious woman navigating identity shifts, retirement, career exits, reinvention, or stepping into a new chapter. Normally, this is $47, but there is a link for people who are listening or watching in the audience that you can redeem this for free. If you find this like years and years after this episode
Right.
comes
It
out,
should
it
still
will
be
have
there.
changed. May not reach out to Brenda for her new thing, but
Yeah,
that is the
reach
link.
out to me for my new thing. That's true. And feel free to share it with a friend, even if they didn't listen. Like it's okay. Even though I typically charge for it. But I love this idea of a third act.
I
think
love that too, actually, because people keep talking to me about second act, and I'm like, hold the phone. But yes, the third act, I really do like
So
that.
I think I heard Jane Fonda, and maybe even Jane Fonda wrote a book that she
Oh,
called that.
maybe.
That's a memoir. I don't know. I stole that from somebody. So but I love this idea. So many women I know, like whether they're in their 40s, 50s, 60s, they've worked in a career a long time, probably had families or like, and they're whatever age they are, they're looking at a new phase, right? Like we live so much longer.
We live so much longer, and the new phase thing is tricky if you have a limiting belief where you think you're only ever supposed to have one phase.
Yes.
It throws you through a loop. You're like, why am I feeling untethered?
Yes.
Yeah.
And so I really wanted to create this third act reset to give some grounding, to give you a place to sort of start to explore like what could be possible if I quit thinking about what might upset somebody or what, like all those things that we do that limit ourselves to be able to start to expand into what's really possible for us. And our ability to do that at 40, 50, 60 is so different than like when we were in our 20s in college or whatever and planning that first big long phase of our lives.
Yeah, no, it's so funny. Like the first job interview where they're like, where do you see yourself in 5 years? And you're like, well, 5 years ago I was in middle school. So
right. kind of hard to figure that out. Yeah. So so I'm super excited about the offer and hope that everybody will take advantage of it. Yeah.
Very cool. That is a very generous offer, and I do want to thank you for that. Are you ready to wrap this up? I could and have many, many times enjoyed talking to you for hours and hours, but I'm ready to wrap it up with my final question. Okay, so here we go. This one is multiple choice, which I wrote this before. I didn't know. What if I give you the generation descriptors? Which is the one that you match? Silent, Boomer, Gen X, Millennial, Gen Z. Which generation do you fall into?
Chronologically, I'm a boomer. I was born in 1961.
Very cool. Do you ever you don't identify?
Think like a boomer? No, I don't identify as a boomer for the most part. And
what year were you born in? 65?
61.
61. All right. Because they do have those like sort of cuspy ones that are like the real names. So like Generation Jones are the very, very young boomers who don't identify with some of the stereotypes. And then I just learned this yesterday, Zennials with an X, not a Z, is the people who are between Gen X, right at the gap between, or in the Gen X millennials, like the elder millennials, baby Gen Xers, they sometimes call those Zennials. So that's that. All right, very cool. Okay, so share something entertaining that you've enjoyed lately. It can be a book, a movie, a TV show, a podcast, something that you've enjoyed that you think that somebody in the audience would enjoy also. So recommendation
Oh
of
my
something
gosh.
good.
Bridgerton.
Oh, have you done all the
Oh
seasons?
my gosh. Bridgerton. I've watched them all as they came out.
Okay.
This last season, first of all, that show
Cinderella.
is so sexy.
Yes.
So sexy and hot. But I did love this the sort of Cinderella thread, but then it kind of gets away from it, right? Which I
Yeah.
appreciated. I appreciated they didn't just lock into that. Um, yeah,
I got
love
into
music.
I
You
totally.
know,
I got into the
yeah,
thing where I was watching it and there were people who were like complaining about it and I was like, this is not my room because like it's not
yes.
perfect, but I just am in it for the joy. The people are
And that the
pretty, the
mom
costumes are
gets,
pretty,
yes,
the
it's
music
so
is fun.
beautiful. Beauty is like a value for me in my life, I've realized, and that show is beautiful in every way.
And we pretty much
And
always know that it's going to be a happy ending. Like
yeah,
it's like
yeah,
we know that the writers are going to work it out for us.
right, right. And I'm fine with that.
I am too.
Yeah, yeah.
Listen, I'm all
We
about.
got enough crazy shit in the world. I want
Yep.
my entertainment to be a happy ending.
Life is hard. Absolutely. Okay, third and final. Brenda, I happen to know that you love for yourself a delicious cocktail. Oh my gosh. Watching you in Mexico, there was a time you were shopping, and I forget what you were trying to find, maybe vodka or something like that. And I was like, this is so funny because in Mexico, it's all about the tequila and the rum and the beer.
Yes.
And I was like, that's so funny. Anyway, what is one of your favorite cocktails at the moment?
Oh, okay. I'm loving gin gimlets. I am a gin or vodka drinker,
Okay.
but pretty much no other alcohol. So yes, even getting vodka in Mexico was so hard and expensive. I was spending double on cheap vodka what I'd spend on good vodka here. Anyway, that's another story. But I'm loving gin gimlets. So it's basically gin, a little simple syrup and lime, fresh lime. Um, Next to that, in my favorite cocktail would be a lemon drop, which
Okay.
would be vodka, simple syrup, and lemon juice. And my favorite for many 20 years probably is a Cosmo, a
Mm.
classic with really good mixology. That most bars make horrific Cosmos. So if you only had Cosmos at a bar, don't drink it. Just say no. Make them the way I make them. A Cosmo is a beautiful thing when it's made right.
That's true with a lot of cocktails. I'll share with you, and then I'm going to end this up. But I have a hilarious gimlet story from when I was a child. So,
Oh,
like, we used to go to like this like burger shack bar like all the time, and there was a local person who was famous, and she had her own drink on the menu, which was called the Jackie Teeny. And the root of the Jackie Teeny was that she would go to the bartender and order a vodka gimlet, and he would fight with her that that was not a gimlet, that gimlets were gin. And eventually what he
yeah.
did is he was like, here's your drink, the Jackie Teeny.
Yes. Well, it's funny you say that because I started drinking them with vodka. So I only drank vodka for many, many years. I mean, I've only drank since I was 40, but anyway. Um, and then I started dabbling in gin. And just a couple weeks ago, I'm like, I'm going to try a gimlet, which I think of as vodka.
Yep.
I'm going to try that with gin. And oh my gosh, I loved it. I loved it.
There you
Yeah.
go. All right, that's it. Brenda Florida, thank you so much for being a wonderful
Oh,
guest today on the show.
my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining me today. I hope you enjoyed the show. Before I go, I want to encourage you to become a bigger part of the conversation. Please subscribe wherever you're listening or watching the show. That helps my stats. A request from the bottom of my indie creator heart is to please tell your friends about the show. That is the real way new people discover it. If you feel motivated, I would love it if you rated the show or wrote a review on whatever platform you are using. Please be sure to head over to imperfectadulting.com and sign up for the email community. I call this the Village. You'll get some free stuff right away, and you'll begin to get the weekly emails that I send. This includes the links for special offers from any guests on the show and cool stuff I put together for the community. There's a lot more going on than just this show, and the only way to find out is to get the emails. Plus, you're busy. You don't have time or desire to follow every single tidbit on social media, and you don't have to because I'm happy to send it to you. If you have a story you'd like to share with the audience, I have an open application for guests. Guess where you'll find it? That's right, on the website and in the emails. And that's a wrap for this episode. Until next time, remember that the journey is the destination. Ralph Waldo Emerson said that, not me. Well, until just now. I did just say it. But what I want you to hear today is that if your adulting journey isn't going the way you expected, that just may not mean you're lost. It may mean that you're just on your way. And now, the fine print. The Art of Imperfect Adulting podcast and streaming video show is a copyrighted work created and produced by Amy Stone and Amy Says So. The music was written and produced by Todd Thompson at Dharma Bomb Studios. All rights are reserved. Anything expressed on this show is offered as entertainment, and the views of the guests may not always represent the ideas and viewpoints of the host. That's me. Amy Stone does not intend to hold myself, herself out to provide professional advice or recommendations of any kind. In the end, you and you alone need to make those kinds of decisions based on your personal and individual situation, needs, circumstances, and comfort level. Yeah, it's a little weird for me to talk about myself in the third person, but you get the idea. This is Amy Stone, signing off.